This is a lesson on the stationary sanders. The one behind me is a belt and disc sander, and in a little bit we'll talk about the spindle sander as well. All right, I'm gonna stand up so that you won't see my face, but I can't get a good camera angle anyway, but that doesn't matter if you see me. So, if you have your hand out on this machine, pull it out and follow along. But basically, this is a stationary belt sander as opposed to a portable belt sander, and it also has a disc sander on the side. This is a belt and disc sander. These come this way, like this, with two things attached, or you could just get a belt sander, or you could have just a disc sander. But this machine is a combination of the two. Typically, these are set up with coarse sandpaper for heavy wood removal, and you'd use it right after you came off the bandsaw. So for example, we cut this out on the bandsaw. You can see that the surface is rough from the bandsaw, and now we want to bring our edge down to our line. Typically when you cut out on the bandsaw on a curve, you want to cut it a little big because of the rough surface, and it's difficult to get a nice clean surface anyway. Then you're going to come here to the belt sander to clean up that edge. You can use a belt sander or a disc sander for outside curves or straight areas. All right. Inside curves you cannot do on a belt or disc sander because it's a flat surface and it can't get into that space. All right. But we can do outside curves and flat areas here. If you have a combination like this, I suggest doing the outside curves and flat areas, convex, this is called, by the way, the convex areas and the flat areas first, and get as much as you can on the belt sander, and then whatever you can't get on, go to the spindle sander to get that done. Okay. Let's start off by talking a little bit about safety, as we like to do with every machine. Obviously, you want to be wearing safety glasses. You want to have loose clothing out of the way, so I have my sleeves rolled up above my elbows. All right. Don't be holding the work with a glove or with a rag or anything where there's something could get caught in the moving belt and sucked into the machine and pull your hand with it. Okay. All adjustments should be made with the machine off. The table is adjustable. We'll talk about that in a second, but you want to do that with the machine stopped. All right. Changing belts or discs, you want to unplug the machine so that there's no chance of getting injured or having the machine come on by accident. Make sure that the belt is tracking properly. We'll talk about that when we turn it on, but you don't want it drifting as you're working. And make sure the disc on the disc sander is stuck well, that it's not coming unstuck. This is put on here with an adhesive, so make sure that it's stuck all the way on like this one is. All right. This is a no-brainer, but keep your hands away from the spinning disc. That abrasive is very coarse, and if you touch it, like sometimes you're holding it and you don't realize it, and your knuckle touches into the belt while it's moving, and it'll sand away your skin, and that takes a long time to heal because it's not like a cut where the skin just has to heal back together. That skin is gone, and it has to grow back. So be conscious of that moving belt. Don't treat this lightly over here. Be careful when sanding smaller pieces of wood, and I would not sand something really small because if it's too small, it could get pulled out of your hand and pull your hand into the belt as it flips over. So make sure it's at least a medium-sized piece of wood, something you have enough to hold on to and hold flat to the table. On the disc sander, the disc spins, so one side of the disc is spinning up, the back half, in this case, and the other side is spinning down. You want to sand on the downward side because it holds your piece of wood tight to the table. Over here, it's trying to flip the piece of wood up in the air, and also the sawdust is coming up in your face. So you always try to sand as much as possible on the downward side of the disc. That is a test question, by the way. So on a disc sander, you have to be conscious of that. You don't have to worry about it on the belt, but you do on the disc. All right. On the spindle sander, we'll talk about the fact that you always want to use the smallest throat plate. That's one of the safety rules on here, but that pertains to the spindle sander. And of course, the last thing on here is always make sure you unplug it when you're changing belts or discs. All right, and we just mentioned that a minute ago. All right, a couple of other things before I forget it. The tables on these adjust, and to adjust the table on the disc sander, there's a knob on both sides. You loosen this knob and another one like it on the other side, and you can change the angle on the table if your board doesn't have a 90-degree surface to it. When you're putting it back to 90 though, please take a tri-square, I have one here, and set it back exactly to 90. And the way you do that is you put the tri-square onto the table, bring it up to the disc, and adjust it till it sits flat and tighten that back up. Okay. The belt sander has a similar adjustment, only with just one knob on one side on this particular machine. And again, use the square to get it 90 degrees again. So both tables tilt. Also, the tables have a groove in them for use with a miter gauge. The miter gauge you would typically use with a table saw or a bandsaw for cutting 90-degree surfaces. But if I wanted to somehow hold this here so that you can see it, let me turn it around so you can see better. If you wanted to get this so that it met the belt at a particular angle, you could use a miter gauge with the straight edge against a miter gauge to hold your board at a particular angle, whatever you'd want. We don't do it a lot, but there is a groove in the table to accommodate a miter gauge, so you can use it on either side. All right. So let's talk about this for a second. This has got a 6-inch wide belt and a 12-inch wide disc, but essentially you still have 6 inches of area on either one to use. Since the belt goes by perfectly straight, no matter where you sand, it's going to sand at the same rate. On the disc sander, it's going to sand faster near the outside than it does near the inside, because more abrasive goes by for every revolution than it does near the center. So the further out you are on the belt sander, the faster it's going to sand and take wood off. So if you have just a little bit to take off, you might move a little closer to the center. It will load up faster, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but just be conscious of that. All right? So the disc sander does take off more wood faster near the outside than it does near the inside. The belt sander takes it off the same all the way along. All right? Another difference between the two, the belt sander is kind of bulky near the end, and if I had an inside corner that I wanted to get into, like this, I can't get it very close to the end because the belt doesn't come right to the end of the machine. The disc sander, on the other hand, does. The abrasive goes right to the end of the disc, so this will be better for getting in a corner, and I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. All right, so let's talk about this. So when I first go to turn the machine on, I turn it on and off once just to make sure the belt is tracking properly. If the tracking is off, the belt could drift left or right and actually sand into and cut into the machine, because these abrasive belts are pretty aggressive and they'll even cut metal. So if you ever turn the machine on and you see sparks or you smell something burning, turn it off right away, because the belt has probably drifted over and cut into the side of the machine. So what I usually do, the start and stop button on this machine is down low on the side here. Turn it on and off, just real quick, and just make sure that the belt is traveling straight. If it's drifting left or right, the tracking needs to be adjusted, and so call me over and I'll help you do that. But just so you know, the adjustment is this knob here. You would loosen this locking knob here, and there's a roller across the top with an arm that comes down and a pivot here. So when I back off that screw, the roller tips this way and the belt will move that way. If I tighten the screw, the roller tilts this way and the belt wants to drift towards me. So when we put a new belt on, we just play with that until that gets just right and the belt runs in one spot, and then we just tighten this back up to lock it in place. The knob in the back is a tensioning knob, so if I needed to change the belt, I would take the top and the side off, loosen that knob, and the rollers come together, and I can take the belt off and put a new belt on, tighten it back up again, and then redo the tracking. Those are some of the things that I usually deal with. But if you had a belt sander, that's how that works. Okay. The discs are on there with an adhesive. That it's a sticky back disc. You just peel the paper off, and it sticks to the metal platen of the disc sander. All right. So I did a start and stop to make sure that the tracking was good, so that looked good. So now I'm going to turn it on and run it. Okay. And now I want to bring it down to my line. So I'm going to come over on this side so you can see. And I'm going to just work on that belt, rocking it back and forth until I get down to the line. I try to get it so that I'm leaving a trace of the line behind. I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but there's a little bit of the line left, so that I know that I haven't gone too far. This does leave some sanding marks, but they're a lot less than the belt sander, so this will need some finish sanding, but I'm getting the shape down. I'm using the belt sander as a grinding machine. Now I've got a straight area here. I can do most of that. But the end of the machine is kind of in the way, so I can't get all that all the way in. Maybe I'll try it on the belt sander, the disc sander. Let's get a little closer on the disc. So I've gotten that down to where I want it. But I cannot get the curve, so I'll do that on the spindle sander. Now, one thing I want to show you on the disc sander, if I have an inside corner like this, which is similar to where this curve was, I can get tighter into the corner here than I can over there. So I'll just lay this right here. And I can come right up to my line that way. I still have a little bit of handwork to do in here because it doesn't get it perfect, but it gets it a lot closer than it would on the other side. Now, this other line, if I want it to sand here, I have to put it face down. So sometimes I actually have to draw the line on the other side so I can see it. Okay. Now, before I walk away, you'll notice that the belt is starting to get filled. And if I had a lot of sanding, I'd want to clean the belt every so often. The way we do that is with a belt cleaner. It's this rubber block that we put on here, made for this. And with it running, you push it into the belt. And you can see it cleans the sawdust right out of the belt. It pulls the sawdust out. Sometimes I'll do it as I turn the machine off. What you don't want to do is turn the machine off and walk away while it's still coasting. So I can kind of kill two birds with one stone and clean off the belt or the disc while it's stopping, and it stops it quicker. All right. So this is called a abrasive belt cleaning block. All right, and it's just this soft rubbery stuff that pulls the sawdust out. If you don't do this, what happens is the sawdust gets packed into the grains of the sandpaper, and it glazes over, and the belt is shot. So if you do this, these belts will cut metal. These are these are aluminum oxide belts. They're very tough. They hold up for a long time, but their biggest thing in a wood shop is getting clogged and having that wood fiber and resin baked into the belt from the friction, and then you can't clean that anymore. So you got to keep one of these handy and do that as it's running, so that every so often you're cleaning the sawdust out of this so it doesn't get glazed over like that. Be aware you don't want to use these when these get really short, because they're dangerous and they could flip over. Again, notice what I did is I laid it on the table and pushed it into the belt to clean up, or the disc, to clean up the sawdust. All right. You can even use this with a portable belt sander. What I'll often do is put it in a vise so it's sticking up, and while I'm sanding, every once in a while I'll go over and sand over the top of it with the belt sander, and that will do the same thing on a portable belt sander. All right. So that's how you do the sanding on a belt or disc sander. Let's move over to the spindle sander and see how that works.